Wesley Easterling and his 2-year-old daughter Riley live in the heart of Appalachia, Elliott County, Kentucky.
I voted for Donald Trump.
Which is noteworthy because Donald Trump is the first Republican presidential candidate he has ever voted for.
Elliott County was founded in 1869. There have been 37 presidential elections since then. Remarkably, in this county, the Democratic candidate has won every one of those elections until this one.
And Donald Trump won big here, getting more than 70% of the vote. Many people like Wesley Easterling believing
he had a lot of amazing ideas. He just had this charisma about him. He was something different.
This county is one of the poorest ones in the country. The poverty rate is over 34%, and it has one of the highest percentages of people in the nation who rely on federal benefit programs. And Wesley Easterling is one of them. He and his family have benefited from Medicaid and food stamps. During the presidential campaign, he took candidate Trump at his word.
Save Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security without cuts. Have to do it.
When he said that he wasn't going to cut Medicaid or, the benefits, I believe that.
But the proposed new health care plan and the proposed federal budget cut hundreds of millions of dollars a year from Medicaid. The budget also makes cuts in programs ranging from food stamps to Social Security disability insurance.
I mean, I felt just like I was insulted, just like he played me for a fool. I mean, I kind of took it personal.
If you could do it over again, if Election Day were today, who would you vote for?
Hillary, without a doubt.
Inside Elliott County's Penny Mart, we talked with other Trump voters. Bluegrass musician Sammy Atkins. If the election were held today, who would you vote for?
Well, I probably have to wait and see a little bit more into in his office, I mean, if he does a lot of cutting stuff, I'm sure it might go the other way,
But Trump voter Tim Fannin says he would enthusiastically cast his ballot for Donald Trump again. So what do you say to other people in this county who are upset about these federal programs possibly being cut?
Tough luck. I mean, it has to do what you have to nip it in the bud, as Barney Fife says. You got to nip it in the bud, and you got to start somewhere.
Wesley Easterling just graduated from a pipe welding program at a community college and hopes to get a refinery job soon so he can be off federal assistance.
Donald Trump, during the campaign, said he's going to fight for the little guy. You're the little guy, right?
I am the little guy.
Do you feel he's fighting for you?
No, not at all. The little guy's going to have to fight for himself.
In the meantime, he says he is praying for his family, his country, and his president. Gary Tuchman, CNN, Elliott County, Kentucky.
Joining us now, Scott Jennings, former special assistant to President George W. Bush, and Bakari Sellers, CNN political commentator, former South Carolina State House member. Guys, thanks very much. Scott, the president campaigned on various populist ideals, the Rust Belt, a big part of his winning strategy. So how big of a problem is it if the residents there feel sort of betrayed by him right now?
Well, I think you can always anecdotally find people who don't like a politician that they recently voted for. But on the whole here, Wolf, in Kentucky, where I live, Donald Trump is still overwhelmingly popular. And I also think there's some degree of nuance you have to look at in this reporting, because while he is proposing to cut some things that some people say they still want, there is a recognition here in Kentucky that we cannot necessarily afford everything that's been promised by the previous administration, both at the federal level and here at the state level. And so what you have in Kentucky is a recognition that at this point, we now have 1 in 3 people on Medicaid. And there is a discussion going on. Is this something we can actually afford? And has Donald Trump been left with making the hard decision to get this program back into a place where we can actually afford it, and it can then take care of the people who truly need it? So there's a balance that has to go on here. But I think in Kentucky, Donald Trump would still overwhelmingly win the electoral votes if the election were held again today.
That's a fair point. Bakari, we should point out it's not all naysayers across the board. There are plenty of conservatives, like we just saw in Gary's piece, who are, in fact, championing these cuts by the president. Go ahead and respond.
Well, I think, Wolf, one of the things that we're seeing is that Donald Trump has come through and he said that he was going to preserve Medicare, he was going to preserve Medicaid, and those just simply aren't things that he's doing. He's cutting Medicaid, he's cutting TANF, he's cutting food stamps, he's cutting these things that people depend on, especially right there in Kentucky. And what we're seeing is not anything new. It's not a Donald Trump phenomenon. We're seeing rural, working-class white voters who are voting against their own self-interest. But even more, I love how The Atlantic, I love how the New York Times, and even us at CNN oftentimes go out and we go on these missions where we try to find these voters who are economic anxiety voters. But that is not what it is, Wolf. What it is it's cultural anxiety. We're seeing individuals who are voting and issues that are coming about, whether or not it's gay marriage, whether or not it's transgender rights, whether or not it's the browning of the country, who are voting against that, who are voting against that image, that picture. So it's not as much economics as it is the direction of the country, and that's a larger discussion that has to be had.
Well, let me ask Scott to respond to that. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I think there's some arrogance and condescension in that viewpoint. Look, Kentuckians are proud Americans, and yes, there is some self-interest in any vote you cast in any election, but there's also national interest. And I do agree, there are some cultural issues at play in this last election. Hillary Clinton was openly disdainful of Appalachia. She said she was going to put coal miners and coal companies out of business. And there was a real disconnect between the National Democratic Party and rural America, not just in Kentucky, but in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, all these states that Donald Trump won. They have one thing in common. They're in this part of the country where the Democratic Party lacked a message that appealed to the people that they had previously relied upon to win in presidential elections. And so until the Democrats come up with a message that actually appeals to rural America, they're going to keep losing elections here. And yes, some of that is cultural, but you have to remember, not every voter goes to the polls and says, well, who can I vote for based solely on who's going to send me the most money? Some people like to vote on national security, terrorism, pro-life issues that was mentioned. That's absolutely true. There are other things at play.
Right.
Donald Trump checked way more boxes than Hillary